Can you recreate Macbeth in real life in student government?
Who's second in line in student government?
Well, I don't know, but I didn't win, so I might as well murder the person who beat me.
Oh, I see.
Will
Has anyone predicted that you will become?
I predicted that I would win.
Well, I don't know that you
My
predicted.
friends thought I was gonna win.
Are your friends like have that ability? Okay, so I'm going to give you a few points for doing this assignment. So that gives you incentive for taking some notes here. So on a piece of paper, I'm going to stay back here because I'm recording it for the people who aren't here, but you can listen from back here. You're going to just listen to me talk here for a minute. I think that's going to work. Yes, okay. So as I'm talking, take some notes about what's on this screen, especially because we're going to learn a little bit here about Shakespearean tragedy and try and decide then ultimately what to make of this play Macbeth. So at the very end, he's got this speech where he talks about how life is but a sound and a fury signifying nothing. Let me read that. Actually, let me read that line exactly. He says, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now, that is a really bleak way of looking at life. Like basically, yeah, you go through life, terrible things happen to you, some good things happen to you, it's all meaningless, and then you die. That's kind of the attitude that Macbeth has here at the end of the play, right? And we would call this like a nihilistic attitude. Nihilists believe there's no meaning to life. There's no meaning to what you do. There is no moral authority that governs your actions. You're not punished or rewarded for your behaviors. It's all just sort of random. That is, yeah, like I said, super bleak. We need to decide if the play believes that too, because the play is bleak. At the end, a lot of people die in this play. A lot of children die in this play. All of Macduff's children are dying. There's a war going on, so all these soldiers are dying, all just for Macbeth's ambition. It does feel a little nihilistic. It does feel a little meaningless. Like, what was the point of all of this, right? If he was just going to kill to be killed, like, what was the point? So we have to decide if the play actually does believe that there's a point to life, right? And this goes back to the genre of the play. The genre is tragedy. It's obviously, it's not, the Shakespeare can be divided three ways actually. There's tragedy, there's comedy, and history. Macbeth, it takes enough like liberties. It's not true to real events, so we wouldn't call it a history play. So then trying to decide if it's a tragedy or a comedy, it's very clearly a tragedy, right? And there was a Greek philosopher named Aristotle who talked about what the purpose of tragedy was. So way back when writing was first invented, people started using it to record stories. And you could kind of divide it into those categories. Like it's either a story that makes you feel sad or afraid or angry, or it's a story that gives you hope and makes you laugh and makes you feel like life is, worth living. And you can kind of divide them that way, right? So Aristotle was talking in this book called Poetics about what the purpose of tragedy is. And he starts with this main question, like, why would human beings want to read things, or in that case, watch things in plays that inspire negative emotions? Like, and I want to throw that at you. Why do you read or watch things that make you, if not cry, if you're not a big crier, that make you sad? What do you think the answer is to that? Yeah, Kaylee? Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. Like, I remember when I cry in a movie, I remember that scene so much better than like any episode of Seinfeld. I've seen, which I laugh at a lot. You know, I like Seinfeld. It's a great show, but like just those few moments when I've cried in a movie, those are the ones that like are so memorable. And if we're talking about these things being entertaining and kind of breaking up the monotony of your day, you know, how your day is just sort of like boring and you go through the motions, then this is going to be most entertaining because it's eliciting this really strong response for us. Yeah, Katie? Yeah, and so the sad emotions, it's like we feel sad. I mean, this sounds like such a stupid thing to say, but we feel sad in everyday life, right? And so we want to see those emotions reflected to us on screen. We want to see that other people are sad. There's some sort of comfort in that, I think, but I also think there's something about empathy that builds. Like, I've never been sad in the way Peter Parker is sad at the end of the newer Spider-Man, which I won't give away, but like, I've never been sad in that way. That has never been my situation. And yet I watch that and I can gain sympathy for a whole set of emotions, you know, even in a fantasy setting, I can get that sympathy, you know, and that empathy. So I know what it would be like to be in that situation. Aristotle felt like the main emotions that you get from tragedy are pity and fear. We pity the person on screen, meaning, and he's meaning that in like the way we would use empathy. Like we actually, we can imagine what that feels like. We see them as fellow human beings. And we also, with the pity, we feel sorry for them, right? But it can also inspire fear. So the tragedy can be good for learning lessons. Like if somebody does something wrong and they experience something awful, we could be afraid that if we do that same behavior, we'll have the same experiences. So the big emotions with tragedy, again, are pity and fear. And he says we get that because of something called mimesis. Mimesis is a great word to know if you're wanting to impress your English teacher next year. Mimesis means that it's recognition, it's a mirror of yourself on the screen. So that's where we get the word, the root words for mirror and the root word for mimesis is the same. But it's like you look at the screen, you can see the truth of the world on the screen. I don't know why I always talk about movies with this, but I think it makes it easier for me. Or in a book, you read the truth in a book and you can recognize that. And that is part of the joy of reading fiction, is recognizing that. So what like Katie talked about with relating. Yeah. I would say, so I read a book and I'm like, wow, this is like really true to what my life is like. I would say this book is really mimetic of real life. Mimetic, yeah. Yeah. Or I would say, you know, I think the reason that I liked reading this book was because it had a lot of mimesis in it. Yeah, there you go. And you're gonna sound, I mean, you're gonna get an A for the whole year because of it. So yeah, we see ourselves in these characters and we recognize the truth of what it is representing. And the way that a play establishes this is two ways. And these are Greek words that I honestly have to look up every time to distinguish them. So I'm not expecting you to memorize these or anything, but it's peripeteia and anagnorisis. So peripeteia in our English words is a reversal of situation. So at some point in every tragedy, someone has some sort of movement. We call this character arc a lot of times. They either grow in fortune, and if it's a tragedy, they always fall in fortune. So peripeteia in a tragedy specifically relates to when the character's fortune moves from good to bad, or from pretty good to a lot worse. Agnorisis is a recognition. This is when the character recognizes, it's almost like the character has recognized their reversal of situation and they realize there's nothing they can do about it. So it's like a moment of helplessness in the play, or in the movie or in the book. It's when a character says, okay, I thought I had complete control over this situation. Now I know I don't. And in a tragedy, that inevitably moves towards some terrible ending. And in a Shakespearean tragedy, that almost 100% of the time leads to death. So it's like you recognize you don't have limited control. You just have to now go through, you have to suffer the consequences of what you did without being able to change it. So peripeteia, anagnorisis. Does everybody have those written down? All the notes? I'll give you 30 more seconds because I've got some questions to ask about this. While you're writing, one thing is about mimesis. that Aristotle also talks about. Have you ever heard about the idea of catharsis? You ever said like, oh, I experienced, there's a cathartic moment, or offers some catharsis? That also comes from this book, Aristotle's Poetics. And he's talking about how tragedy, because we see it on screen and we recognize it, that can give us like a kind of purging of those emotions. So it's like, we'll experience pity and fear in a safe space, in a text or in a movie, and then we can leave the theater and we can feel better because we had all those negative feelings purged in the experience. I don't necessarily know if that's how it works. Sometimes I leave a sad play just feeling sadder for a while, but Aristotle felt like that was the way it works. All right. So here are my questions I want to ask you. This is the last thing we're going to do today. You're going to write the answers down on paper. When does Macbeth have these two moments? What would you say is his moment of peripeteia and his moment of anagnorisis? When does Lady Macbeth have those things? If you think she does, you might argue that she doesn't. But this is the ultimate answer I want to get to, is understanding those things might help us understand if the play believes that life has meaning. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to work through these answers. You can do it on your own, or you can do it with a partner, however you want to. If you don't mind if you collaborate, and then we'll talk about it. I'm going to give you 8 minutes, so we can just talk about it right at the very end of class. Yay! Okay. Thanks.
Because that's what you know. Yeah. It was fortunate that.
Yeah. No, we won't use it. Well, that makes sense.
I'll help you when I take care of it.
Ooh, yikes, that is sad. Ooh,
I don't know.
I mean, that's a great way to end it.
I was just gonna be like, I'll figure it out. Well, maybe it's
Yeah.
not like, not like that much.
Because he hasn't prioritized his relationship, he's prioritized his power. Yeah. Yeah. That box is getting pretty full. I gotta start bringing things. No. Yeah. Maddie, you're the runner for this assignment? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, here at the end here, let me just check in with you about what I was kind of saying with that last bit. So we hear Macbeth trying to gain meaning in his life through ambition. Like he's always looking to make his life meaningful and to make himself important by getting more and more power in the kingdom, right? And we see how that might be the kind of meaning that Shakespeare finds meaningless. And the reason that I say that is because at the end of this play, Fleance is still out and about, right? The witch's prophecy of Banquo's kids being king could very well still become true. I assume that it will become true because everything else they've said has come true. So Fleance is out there, and Fleance is not the son of Malcolm. So what that implies is that there will be more violence to come, that something will happen where Fleance becomes king, and the turnover of power is very rarely peaceful from one family to another, right? So the play kind of suggests, yeah, if we're looking at power structures in a kingdom, maybe it is all meaningless. Like maybe becoming king is a meaningless kind of action. Maybe it doesn't really make any difference in the grand scheme of things because there's just going to be this cycle of violence, right? But there is meaning in Macbeth being sort of punished for his sins. Like we see him rejecting meaning as he starts to become punished for the things that he did. And don't we kind of see that as justice? Like if you kill a king, it's almost an eye for an eye kind of justice. You kill a king, and so you as king are going to be killed. There's this way that he's like, oh, I guess life means nothing, just at the moment in the play where we see that life actually does have a meaning, that actually good or bad people at least will be punished. I don't know that we necessarily see good people not punished in this play, but we definitely see bad people punished. So by the play kind of showing him making choices and him reasoning through his choices, we actually see him many times have all these soliloquies where he's reasoning through his choices, and that just like solidifies with us that, yeah, this guy is making his own choices. There are all these outside forces, but like ultimately Macbeth is the one who chooses, I choose my choice. But Macbeth is the one who chooses his choice, right? And because of that, because we see the way that his own actions are kind of individually chosen, I think we can say that this play very strongly believes that life has meaning and life has a purpose and there's a cause and effect sort of like design to the world. Yeah,
Kind of like what I was writing, so it's like the play believes that life is meaning, but like Macbeth was, and like Lady Macbeth was trying to find meaning in life, like possessions and rank.
yes.
When like really like the play believes that meaning in life is like relationships, like how like Banquo had like this good relationship with his son,
Yes.
like how he was gonna be happy.
Beautiful. And Macduff and his family as well, right? And Macduff abandons his family for political purposes. And I don't think the play necessarily thinks that was the right choice. Yeah.
I think it's like, basing off of like life is like based off like your choices, because the only prophecies that came through was when Macbeth was like trying to make them come through. They were like his choices himself, that like Lance may never like be king because he might not choose to actually kill him.
Great point. Yeah. Do we have, yeah, exactly. If it's emphasizing Macbeth's choices so much, then we can't say that Fleance would just fulfill that prophecy. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for reading Macbeth with me. I love this play. Drop your play off, and I'm gonna put him in this purple crate actually. So if you have it with you, drop it off in this purple crate on your way out, and make sure to turn in that assignment that you just did. No problem. You can go. You're good. Hey, see ya. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
I was figuring out. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.